Let me cordially invite our speakers to the stage for the discussion now. Robbie Diamond, founder, president, and CEO of SAFE, an action-oriented, non-partisan organization committed to transportation, energy, and supply chain policies that advance the economic and national security of the United States, its partners, and its allies. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, director for the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at Heritage Foundation. In President Trump's first term, she served as acting assistant secretary for economic policy at the U.S. Department of Treasury. She worked in unlistable senior roles in the White House. Dora Meredith, director of the Overseas Development Institute, Europe, a new global affairs think tank in Brussels, bringing research, ideas, and dialogue with the wider world into the European policy debate. Adam Sikorski, co-founder of the UNIMOT Capital Group, one of the largest private companies on the energy market in Poland. He's a leading energy expert, also a licensed coach, a teacher, a motivational speaker, and a pilot. And the moderator of the session is Maciej Filip Bukowski, a climate diplomacy and energy security expert, head of the Energy and Resilience Program at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, an independent, non-profit, non-partisan Polish think tank conducting research on different aspects of European and transatlantic security.
Welcome. Can everyone hear us loud and clear? Good. The introductions have been made, so this will allow us to save some time, but this is going to be, I think, a quick exchange, but a thoughtful one, on a subject that is as timely as it is important. And actually, I was thinking how to break the ice in here, and it made me think that actually what was written in the blurb for this description of this panel, actually, someone told me that already in December. It was a Chinese academic, a big name in his field, who told me that what riddles these days the energy policy sphere is this, as he called it, a deadly trilemma. Whereas we have the increasingly hard to reconcile priorities of energy security, economic competitiveness, and decarbonization. But of the three, he said, you can only pursue two at the same time. Now, I was thinking that perhaps this should be a way to move forward with this discussion. And Dora, maybe first over to you, because I know that you have some thoughts on the broader picture on whether this indeed is the case.
Thank you. Is that working? Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. And firstly, a huge thank you for the kind invitation to Reka, Tomasz, and colleagues, and for organising this very important event. I wanted to start by saying the past 3 years have served as a wake-up call. The war in Ukraine and subsequent disruption of gas supplies have forced Europe to confront the underlying structural vulnerabilities and dependencies embedded in our economic systems. Exactly as you say, the energy sector is now sitting at this crossroads. And these are some of the issues that we look at ODI Europe, and I know colleagues at the Equilibrium Foundation are also grappling with. In short, the EU can no longer operate on the assumption that interdependence ensures stability. It cannot assume that trade dependencies won't be weaponised. And so because of that, there's been a number of responses from Europe, and I think the State Secretary mapped out these excellently just a minute ago. Europe is establishing shared gas reserves, it's expanding clean energy subsidies, it's driving supply diversification and crafting regulatory tools like the Critical Raw Materials Act. So what we're seeing is really a deliberate shift away from market-led mechanisms towards policy-led interventions to ensure resilience. Now, I think this sort of policy momentum is real, but what we are also seeing is capital allocation creating bottlenecks. So the financing is still, really a question, particularly around critical minerals. If the West is serious about securing strategic autonomy, we must finance extraction, processing, and midstream infrastructure. And that's especially vital for the defense and clean tech sectors, where the security of supply is non-negotiable. And as we move towards ensuring we've got these critical mineral supply chains, I think we've really got to confront the true cost of strategic autonomy in both financial and political terms. So rerouting these supply chains will, of course, mean that we need to look at technology affordability, deployment timelines, and market dynamics. And we've got to be prepared to justify those trade-offs, not just in terms of long-term resilience, but also in terms of short-term efficiency. And I think a final thought, we've got to think about how that de-risking isn't taking place in isolation. As you said, people around the world are thinking about this, and indeed how strategic competitors, China, Russia, will adapt to these shifts. Their responses will shape global commodity markets, they'll influence pricing power, and challenge Western assumptions. So we really need to reflect on what constitutes a secure supply chain, and how do we make sure that we're managing the risks as we do that. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So it seems like we have these major pillars in terms of policy direction that needs to be filled in with substance, right? And for that to happen, there are different solutions, and here lies the innovation part in the name of the topic. But these solutions oftentimes are very specific solutions, specific innovation, specific patents even. And Diana, over to you, because I know that there is this very specific but yet so important and perhaps oftentimes overlooked question of satellites and GPS systems and how they matter in this broader picture, and how to protect them against foreign adversaries.
Yes, well, that's an excellent question. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? It's an excellent question. I think the importance of resilience of energy is vital, and it's important very much that Europe manage to be resilient. And I want to start out by asking you, how many of you believe that net zero is needed to save the planet? A few hands at the back. How many of you believe that net zero can save the planet?
Well, you, Commissioner, would be disappointed, I guess.
Yes. Well, I think that what Russia showed us and the invasion is that net zero is more of a mirage in terms of a just transition. Because what Europe did was, in the past, get rid of its reliable energy. So Germany got rid of its nuclear plants. Countries had been phasing out their baseload coal, nuclear, natural gas industries in favor of renewables, which are more expensive and which is leading to a weakening of the European economy and a weakening of the European defense. And we can see that China is becoming more strong because of differing electricity prices. And these are self-inflicted wounds, self-inflicted in that it's possible for Europe and the United States to move back from them. So if we consider electricity prices around the world in terms of kilowatt hours, cents per kilowatt hour, we have Germany at 39 cents per kilowatt hour, the UK at 35 cents per kilowatt hour. The top 7 out of the 10 most expensive countries are all in Europe. Then you get to the United States, an average of 18 cents per kilowatt hour, but that's a difference of the most expensive, California, 32 cents, and the least expensive, Utah, 11 cents. But then you get to all these other countries that are less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And this is China, Iran, Qatar, Russia, all the OPEC countries. So our rivals without using net zero, without any of the transition to wind and solar, are becoming stronger economically, stronger in terms of defense. And we are shifting our energy-intensive manufacturing over to these countries where the same products are made in a dirtier way. Because China is building 2 coal-fired power plants every week. Yes, it's building more wind and solar, but in terms of the electricity it's generating from coal, that is becoming far greater at the same time. So what I want to argue is that resilience is important. Resilience is important. A strong electricity grid creates a strong economy and a strong defense. And President Trump, by moving away from net zero, by leaving the Paris Agreement, by focusing on energy dominance, by ending the subsidies for wind and solar, is making the United States stronger. And Europe needs to do the same in order to keep even. Otherwise, Europe is going to continue to have slow growth, continue to be deindustrialized, and continue to have a weaker economy. And I'd be happy to answer more questions about it later.
Thank you. It appears as if what you just said sort of answered the question that came up from the Q&A, which, if you allow me, I'll just read it out loud. How can Europe be competitive with the US if, indeed, gas and electricity prices are several times higher here, not to speak about China? Well, indeed, that's the question we are grappling with above all today. Now, but if that regard precisely, perhaps, over to you, Robbie. And I was thinking perhaps in maybe less so in your function as the CEO of SAFE and more in the function as CEO of Electrification Coalition.
Yes, so thank you for having me. I like to follow Diana because it makes me seem like I'm positive. The truth is what everyone says is, is quite true. Many of these things are incredibly self-inflicted wounds. And in particular, in bringing up China, it is true that we are allowing them to launder their coal into our products, even our clean energy products. And I think that is, a great shame. And really what's happened in the world, I think, is we've come to a sort of a political culture and potentially young people who have really taught that everything, they don't know where things are made, how they're made, and everything is zero. Zero land movement, zero energy, zero water. It's all perfect. Zero carbon. And in reality, that's not how things are done. And in the end, if we're unwilling to speak the truth to our populations, ultimately, we'll just have a hear no evil, see no evil policy, which is, again, shifts over. But I don't think the three are necessarily totally irreconcilable at the same time. I think it's a question of timing and pace and really thinking through, what we should be doing. How do we prioritize things? But in reality, when you have a short-term policy and a medium-term policy and a long-term policy, all those things do have to start at the same time. You just know that they're going to happen over time. And it's really this sort of lack of, I think, dealing in reality that has caused this problem that we face ourselves. And the first reality is this question of energy prices. Now, the one thing that I do think the war did show, or COVID and our supply chains, was that politicians, Benjamin Franklin once said, the two things in life are death and taxes. Well, the other two things are that politicians will always make sure your gas tank is full and your lights go on. And they'll do it in the worst way possible when that actually happens. And in Europe in particular, I think it's not that there aren't resources, it's that they didn't prioritize to get those resources at this point. So I think, again, I'm hopeful because of technological trends over time, but if you don't deal with these short-term and medium-term issues today, we will end up in a society that can't produce anything, doesn't produce anything, and ultimately we'll all be poorer and in greater danger for it.
Thank you. If you allow me, though, just a quick follow-up question on what you have just said, because I wonder, from your perspective still, Robbie, would you say that electrification, as some people say, I even had the conversation just a week ago with one French CEO who said, of course, we all have our agendas. He has his as well, given that he represents a clean tech company. But is electrification indeed the way to net zero, if not to net zero, to a lower carbon society in Europe?
Yeah, so electrification of transportation. So SAFE as an organization is not a climate group, and we never were. Yet we were the first people to say, I'd say in the United States, that we should, transition some of our vehicles, not necessarily all of our vehicles, to electric vehicles. And the reason for that is, you use diverse fuel sources to go into your vehicles. Domestic energy. In the United States, that's coal, that's natural gas, that's wind, that's solar, that's geothermal, that's hydro. That is what Winston Churchill once said, right? Where do you get security? You get it from diversity and diversity alone. And in some ways, our cars today are the most hostage to one fuel source. So in America, 30+% of society has 3 cars. 60+% have 2 cars. And I guess our view was always that if one of your cars was going to be electric over time, that would not be a bad thing. Now, on our way to that happening, we went from we'll call it the Russian frying pan into the Beijing battery fire. And so, again, you've created a new problem. Doesn't have to be a problem. There are resources everywhere, the ability to mine, the ability to process, the ability to have precursor materials. So my answer to your question is, look, there is a trend towards more electrification overall in society. Our cars are just becoming more electric, even the gas-fired ones, even the hybrids. And I just don't think it will be all cars, and it will certainly not be all classes of cars, but this will be a trend. Last thing is BYD, is now valued more than GM, Ford, and Volkswagen combined. So the market is speaking that there is a trend. Do we want to totally lose out on that trend? No. Are we going to only have electric vehicle companies? No. So car companies? No. But we are losing in this battle because we're just not keeping at all pace.
It's very difficult to out-subsidize the Chinese, though. The United States spends about a quarter of its federal budget on healthcare. So someone poor shows up at a hospital, they get treated. In China, that's not true. You have to have a wad of cash. But they spend their money on subsidizing their favorite companies. So in Germany, you can have a car made by Dacia, which is a German company that sells for about 11,000 euros. That's hardly the cost of a battery. So it's very hard to out-subsidize them, and I believe that European countries, just as President Trump should be drawing a line against allowing these subsidized vehicles in, which can also, by the way, send telematics back to the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party can tamper with the braking systems and spoof them. So yeah, maybe we want electric cars, but I'm not sure we want the Chinese Communist Party to be selling them to us.
Lovely. Hammering the point home that you have just made about not being able to over-subsidize the Chinese. Indeed, for instance, my wife just flew from Warsaw, where in the last 2 or 3 months, the BYD stores have just popped up like that, and basically most of these cars are perhaps twice as good as Teslas and half the price. So indeed, this is an issue to be reckoned with for years to come. But maybe going back home still, and over to you, Adam, now, because you are leading, I think, what is the largest private player in the energy sector in Poland now, and one that is also engaged in a very geopolitically saddle situation, whereas we have to navigate all of these uncertainties, the biggest one perhaps being still the ongoing war in Ukraine. But I know that UNIMOT is indeed engaged in Ukraine in a bunch of ways, and you must have gathered a whole bunch of different insights and lessons from there. And I wonder, in terms of some key notions that have been said, energy security and resilience, combining these two. What do you think in terms of innovation that is, perhaps there are lessons from Ukrainians that we could take home too?
Yeah, thank you very much having me. Definitely we have to say, I think Ukraine is the most innovative country now in Europe and maybe worldwide. The only way they survive is because they are so smart, so quick, they are always looking for really smart solution. And we were facing that in the 21st of February 22, when the Ukraine, they lost the local productions of the fossil fuel. So Kremenchuk refinery was strike, And the security supply, the storage capacity for the fossil fuels, the depots was only for the 3 days of the fight. So thanks to the supply from Poland, Romania, different countries, Lithuania, including Lithuania, I can say they still fight, and they are very initiative in this field. And this is what I want to say. I like a lot this meeting here and the discussion about the politics, energy security. And I heard the name of the Ukraine many times here as well in the different panels. But I think we are still missing in Europe a little bit, and not maybe in Europe, but especially in Europe, and Poland, and Baltic countries as well, the discussion about what kind of the lesson we can take from the Ukrainian conflict when we are talking not about the energy supply, it is mean LNG, is Russian gas coming, from where the crude oil is coming from, but the energy security, if our grid and our internal country systems are ready to supply for the society, and even I'm not talking about the military, yeah? Because the only way that the Ukrainians, they are still supply the electricity or different fossil fuels to the society, it was the way they decentralized the system. The system is very, very decentralized. So the power generation was hit by airstrikes. They lost 60–70% of the power generation, which was mainly driven by coal. Thanks God there were no strikes against nuclear power plants, so they are still operating. But for example, the fossil fuel is a driving force of UNIMOT still. They lost 80% of the capacity, the storage capacity for the fossil fuels. So for example, we are quite happy, I would say, in Poland and many other countries, that maybe many of you doesn't know about that. We have a capacity of the 90 days strategic reserves that we can secure our countries for the supply the fossil fuels if something happened. Yeah, this is despite this is not related to the military reserves, which is a little bit on the side. So it's 90 days. But these 90 days, half of these volumes is crude oil. If we are talking about the crude oil, you need the refinery to process this crude oil. So let's imagine in Maciej refinery in the Baltics countries, if something happened, if the Maciej refinery is shut down, you lose the 50% of your capacity in this case. So this is the first question. Second, it is the supply of the product like diesel, like the gasoline. This is very, very easy targets. So it's a huge discussion now between Ukraine and the European Union, because we as a European Union, we were quite smart to force the Ukrainian to implement the same law we have in European Union, these strategic reserves for 90 days. So what they did, they applied that, and since January this year, each operator in Ukrainian market is forced to keep 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days strategic reserves. But most of these reserves disappear 7 days after this law was implemented, because the Russian strikes to the depots. So they said, okay, this is not relevant to the situation we are. So again, and a little bit about the transition and the transformation. I think we need to decarbonize. We need to decarbonize in Europe. We need to move to the electrification, because we are very dependent in Europe on the fossil fuels coming from external sources, so I don't see any risk on that. But again, we need to talk more about the security, especially that this is not dilemma for me. If even here there is a discussion that, unfortunately, we are facing situation of the possible war against Russia in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or huge threat from them. Decarbonization is not the first challenge and first goal we should discuss now. Again, energy security, but not only from the perspective of the supply. Is LNG coming from Middle East or United States our ally? I'm very happy that we have that. But in the countries, how we would supply the fuel to our friends from Baltics if something happened? I don't believe we are ready to do that Maybe you can tell a little bit more, but from my perspective, we are an important player in the Polish market, so we are on the list of the strategic enterprises. And thanks to Poland, Ukraine survived, and thanks to Romania and Hungary, because we provide the supply of the fuel to the Ukrainians. Are Germans ready to do the same for Poles? Are Poles ready to do the same for Baltics? I'm not 100% sure.
Well, as I understand it, Poland has vast reserves of coal, but you have to buy carbon credits from the EU to use this coal, costing billions of euros. And coal is very clean with the new technology and the scrubbers. And even if Europe stopped using all fossil fuels right away, to do a thought experiment, it would only make a difference of 1/10 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100. If the United States stopped using all fossil fuels right away, makes a difference of 2/10 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100. Makes no difference because China, Russia, Africa, Latin America, they are all increasing their outputs of fossil fuels with low electricity rates, stealing the manufacturing from Europe and the United States, increasing their economic strength while ours decreases. Because the fact is, intermittent energy, wind and solar, are more expensive to use than baseload dispatchable energy because you always have to have a backup. So it's as though I were to say, Jim Carafano in the front row, I would say, Jim, I'm going to give you a beautiful Mercedes, but you can only drive it during the day. And he might say, well, I want to drive at night. I say, too bad, Jim, you've got to get another car to drive at night. And you would say, well, that's 2 cars to fill up with gasoline, 2 cars to change the oil, 2 cars for insurance. Why would I want 2 cars? It's exactly the same with intermittent energy. You need a natural gas or battery backup, so it's more expensive. And our rivals, China, Russia, other countries, Iran, their electricity rates are under 1 cent a kilowatt hour because they are not going for the intermittent energy. They're just going for the fossil fuels. We need to be catching up.
Please, Minister.
So, thank you. And to fully agree with Adam and to what Diane told. In Lithuania's case, we have to have a sort of mix of all of that, the base load plus set renewables, because basically we have several entry points to have non-renewable energy coming into the region, and that's how shall I put it, not the safest option to having such a neighbor as we do. Coming back to the infrastructure protection and ability to function same smart way as Ukrainians do, that's why in the previous months of this year, we are intensively working with Latvians, Estonians, and Polish government to work out a sort of model of excellence for European networks and grids protection in order to invest in a timely manner. As investments today, they might seem quite expensive, but when we count few days without electricity in the region, I guess the calculation is totally different. And therefore, we have to look at the smart islands functioning in every country. So looking at the regional generation capacity, storage capacity, possibilities to shift supplies from one country's region to the other. That's
decentralization.
Yeah, exactly. And the things, the lessons learned from Ukrainians, how to protect our infrastructure, they are of key importance. Because to think that the acts of sabotage can only happen in Lithuania, Poland, or Estonia, that's totally misleading. We can really expect that to happen in Scandinavian countries, we can expect that to happen in Germany, or wherever. Because buying the service of the ones willing to do that is cheap, and the effect is huge. So at this point, we have to work jointly with European partners, with the US, to work to secure the infrastructure, because we have to admit the situation is not business as usual.
Thank you, Minister. We have a bunch of Q&A questions that just came up, and if you allow me to pull up one of those, which I think perhaps all of you would like to share some thoughts on, and that is, well, indeed, competitiveness is important, but what about our common responsibility in fighting climate change? And global warming will harm our economies. Shouldn't we act together? So I guess the key angle here is time, right? Because we are speaking about a danger that can materialize in the future, but we have priorities that may be different now. So who would like to tackle that?
Sure, happy to tackle that.
Please.
The United States has reduced its carbon emissions by about 1 billion metric tons over the past 15 years, at the same time as China has grown it by 6 billion metric tons. We've been using clean natural gas, scrubbers for our coal, and nuclear power. The answer is not more expensive electricity, but clean, dense, baseload power, such as nuclear or natural gas. These are not contradictory.
Anyone else? Minister?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, as you know, we're in a special position. I think we're the only one here who is a landlocked country. So we are in a different position. We opted for green transition, and not only from an environmental point of view, because we do believe that together, as the question says, something has to be done. But it was mentioned before, Europe is responsible for 6% altogether. So we can only make it something that is really inviting for the partners if we prove at the same time what has been told before, that we are competitive. If we just go to the ground with our businesses, then we will prove to the other parts of the world that it's not doable. Therefore, it's very, very, very important that we pay attention to competitiveness. And therefore, I'm the odd person here out, not only for being landlocked, but also for being responsible for the environmental issues. And let me just draw your attention to one tiny little fact, that when we talk about these very important issues, what we all talk about is to look at the whole picture, because it's not enough to just pick out something that seems green or pink or whatever color you want to bring to it, but it's really something that is complicated. So therefore, we believe in a realistic way, the correct pace, as was mentioned, of green transition, because that way it may work. So just an example, I think everybody listens to music. We're very proud that the music industry has reduced plastic use over the past years. It's approximately the 1/5 or even less of plastic use than it used to be when I was a child, so first 3 decades ago. And if we just look at that, then we're very happy. But there's another side of the picture. When you look at how much CO2 is used in order to use the now digitalized version of music, listening to music, then it's 3 times bigger than it used to be 20 or 15 years ago. So the main point is, I think, here to teach to our kids and the generations coming after us to look at the whole picture, not only fall in love with one part that seems green or that seems realistic or that seems inviting in a business or in an environment manner, but look at the whole picture, because that's what counts at the very end. How much does it really cost when it comes to CO2, when it comes to economic expenses, when it comes to social expenses, because that's all 3 factors that we have to take into account.
Adam?
I understand driving force for the climate change was Europe was really driving force together with United States, and we were sure that others will join us. What I want to say from the business perspective is not a situation like 25 years ago when the US and Europe had the technology advantage toward China in different part of the world. We don't have this advantage. Even you mentioned about the BYD electric cars and this one. So in this situation we have around the world, it's not possible anymore that you have different conditions in Europe and different conditions in China or India or other places doing the business. What does mean different conditions? Different taxation about the CO2. This is not possible. We don't have any more such advantage we had in the past 20 years ago. We lost that. China, they made they made homework. They really advanced their technology. They are even on the front of us. So in this case, when you mention common responsibility, again, Paris Treaty, sit together globally, because CO2 is the same CO2 in US, Poland, Hawaii, Russia or India, and Europe could be not exception of that, because then we completely lose our industry.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to everyone. It feels like we have barely scratched the surface, but our time is up, so perhaps we meet in the same room next year and continue the same discussion. Thank you. Please join me in thanking.